Apple II forever, making life better and better. Apple II forever and ever, bringing the rainbow to you.
So we'll get started then. I'm Mark Lemmert of 6502 Workshop, lead developer of the Ultima-inspired Apple II RPG, Nox Archaist. Thank you, thank you. So today I'm going to share history of the evolution of RPG content tool design on the Apple II. And we're going to start with the methods used for the early Ultima games, then take a look at the spreadsheet-based tools I created for the original Nox Archaist game and the Lord of Storms expansion. We'll also take a look at the Outlaw editor, the tool developed by our friends at the Lawless Legends team. And then finally take a really close look at the Nox World Builder, the web-based application I'm developing with assistance from Chris Torrence for creating content in Nox Archaist II, Dragonsmere, and hopefully other games. Let's first take a look at creating the graphics for Ultima. Richard Garriott was kind enough to send me copies of some of his original design documents. And these first few that I'm going to show are where he laid out the pixels for the different shapes, such as transport objects. I definitely recognize that pirate ship down in the lower right, and looks like the rocket ship maybe from Ultima 2 in the kind of center left there. And on this one, I have to remember now, usually space bar advances the slide in the other mode, but in here I've got to actually click on the next slide, so I'm probably going to fumble with that a little bit. But this next one here is mountains. And then various NPCs used in various points in time in different Ultima games. And then this document shows taking a shape layout, like we saw in the previous screens, and doing the Apple II graphics conversion. This is really the meat of the tool. And on the far left-hand side, that's like the pixel layout, like we saw in the other documents, and I believe that's the grass that was used in Ultima there. And the next thing he did is in the center, there's kind of a bunch of tight-looking ones and zeros all compact together, and that's a binary representation of the pixel grid on the left. So for every pixel that's turned on, he would write a 1, and for the pixels that are off, he'd write a 0. And then the 8th bit of each byte is the color bit. It controls the color palette that's available. And so he'd either write a 1 or a 0 for that, depending on which he wanted. But the 8th bit is actually on the left. So, you know, a little bit of tricks that one needs to remember when doing this. And then after doing, writing out the binary, then in the next columns over, he converted the binary to hex. And then one step that's not shown here is the nibbles need to get flipped around when finalizing the actual hex numbers to type into video memory. And the nibbles need to be flipped because of some way that the wiring works between like the raster interface to the video memory. And I don't remember exactly why it was that was necessary, but I'm pretty sure it had something to do with WAS saving chips. And as the programmers, you know, we got to do all the acrobatics to go through it all. Now, before we move on to another generation of tools, let's take a minute to imagine how tedious this was when testing one of these graphics. You know, after going through all this, typing it in, you know, he's then running a build of the game, seeing it on screen, and all of a sudden, oops, something doesn't look right. And now that might be an artistic, now it's programmer art, but you know, nonetheless, it might be not quite, you know, the way the desired outcome was from an art standpoint, or just something really wacky that wasn't expected because of a mistake. Okay, so where's the mistake? Was it in step 1, step 2, step 3, or even ultimately just to type in a typo keying in the final hex numbers into video memory? And imagine that process times however many tile graphics there were in the game. When developing Nox Archaist, I created a couple graphics on graph paper using the same method that Richard Garriott did, because I wanted to, number one, experience what it was like, and additionally to make sure that I had the mechanics down before trying to build them into a tool. Good rule of thumb for any kind of process development: do it manually, then automate it. So then I built a graphics tool using an Excel spreadsheet. I chose spreadsheets because I had a lot of experience with spreadsheets for other things, and I could create something quickly because the size of the, in fact, let me get this, let's enlarge this here. I knew I could create something quickly, and I knew I could resize the cells to be about the size of a pixel. Like you can see the grid on the left, you know, there's rectangle sized cells, and over here these are more like standard spreadsheet size cells. So I kind of pictured how I could do that, and then basically use formulas in Excel to do all the calculations that I was doing by hand on the graph paper, just like Richard Garriott had done by hand on the graph paper. I didn't want to invest more time into creating more robust tools initially because I wasn't sure what was going to be needed later in development. And as it turned out, we ended up creating all of the graphics in Nox 1 using these spreadsheet tools, because by the time I felt sure of what we needed, it was far enough into the project, I thought it was just faster to power through to the end and get you guys the game as quickly as we could and kick the can down the road on the issue of making better tools. So then all of these calculations in basically this section right there below where the archer is, this middle section, that's where all the calculations are happening. It all gets rolled up into this hex table that is circled in red there at the bottom. And that hex table, I would copy and paste that hex table into the source code because I was using a cross assembler. I only did keyed-in assembly on the Apple II kind of in my learning phase of the project, but when I really got into developing the project in earnest, I was using a cross assembler on a modern computer, which had copy and paste. So from that standpoint, this is like light years beyond the graph paper method. As clunky as it sounds, you know, Excel spreadsheet tools in this day and age, or well, it was 2016 or 15 at the time, enormously more efficient than the graph paper method, just letting the spreadsheet do the calculations, no risk of human error mistake, copy and pasting the source code, eliminating that keying in time. I was feeling pretty good about the efficiency gain at the time relative to, you know, the previous way that, that it had been done. Now, let's take a look at the Outlaw editor made by the Lawless Legends team. And this is what the Outlaw editor looked like circa 2016. I just happened to have a 2016 version of it on one of my computers that I was able to fire up and take this screenshot of. And then I got some more recent screenshots a couple of weeks ago from Seth Sternberger, the project leader. They've since improved the tools quite a bit since 2016. This is their tile graphics editor. And this is their map editor. And somewhere on this map is a treasure chest. And then If you click on that treasure chest, it brings up this object script editor where they can kind of define like what's going on with that treasure chest and how is it going to function in the game. And there's various information in the game that they can edit directly through the editor as well. So now let's dive into the Nox World Builder. It's a web-based application using TypeScript and React on the front end and Node.js and MySQL on the back end. I made it as a web-based app for team collaboration. And we'll go ahead and dive right into the tool here. So we have basically the world builder. The way it's organized is there's a pile of data in a MySQL database and various different, what we refer to as views, to look at that data and manipulate that data. In the upper right, there's buttons for pixel view, map view, tile set view, game data view, NPC view. Some of these are complete, some of them are not yet complete, but that's the overall vision for creating the content of the game is going to be done through these different views, all sharing off of a common database and working together. So let's take a look at pixel view. And we'll go ahead and create a new shape. And there's a few fields to fill out here. There's a lot of names on this list, but I want to give credit where it's due. Bill Geege created the vast majority of the tiles in the original Nox Archaist game. There's over 1,000 unique tiles in the original Nox, and Bill is a professional artist as his day job in graphics animation for TVs and movies, and he just happens to also love the Apple II, and so really helped us out a great deal on the graphics side. And we've got other type options here for what kind of tile do we want to create. Do we want it to be a static tile or an animated tile? Or MTT mob animated means a really big, like a boss tile, like we had a 4-tile dragon in the original Nox game. That's what that would be. And we will go ahead and create the new shape. And now we can actually draw pixels on the grid on the left. So for example, I'll just randomly plot a couple pixels here. And the color bit is controlled by these buttons on the left. And that links in, for anyone who's just learning about Apple II graphics, is you can't use any color anywhere you want on the screen. It depends on kind of the rudimentary way to describe it, like which column you're in. Are you an odd numbered column or an even numbered column? So up at the top here is a little palette that I drew to kind of keep track of that, like which colors are available in which column. And right now, notice we're getting the colors from the bottom row in the palette. And we can switch to use the colors in the top row of the palette by flipping the color bit. Like let's click that right here. And we now have the blue and the orange from the top row of the palette appearing, but only on the left side because tiles in Nox Archaist are 14 pixels wide by 16 lines. 14 pixels, not 16, because the 8th bit is used to control the color palette. So in effect, we've got 2 different bytes of memory being represented, and this little white hash line is the reminder separating the 2. And so we click the color bit button on the left. That's only setting the color bit on the left-hand byte. If we click the right-hand button, that's going to set the color bit on the right-hand byte on the screen. We can also make lines like this. So if we click here, we don't get a line. We got these empty pixels. But if we click here, we get a line. The reason is even though there is an empty pixel that's turned off in between the two pixels that we turned on here and here, there's a half pixel color bleed on a CRT monitor that occurs. And since there's only one pixel that's off between the two that are on, the half pixel color bleed to the left and to the right makes it look like it's a line. Some of the tricks of Apple II graphics. So then we have a little black square there in the center of that middle pixel to remind us that that pixel is actually off at the binary level, but it's also showing us that visually on the CRT it's going to appear as though there's color there. Then of course, to make a white line, that's just turning on two adjacent pixels. And so the bigger picture view of all this is, unlike that Excel-based tool that I showed before, the World Builder's pixel editor is actually enforcing the Apple II color rules. It doesn't let us make mistakes. There can still be artistic desires of, well, we really want it to look a little different than it turned out, but there's no more making mistakes based on the color rules, whereas in the spreadsheet, we're just putting ones and zeros in Excel cells, spreadsheet cells, and then manually changing the color of the cell like you do in any spreadsheet to kind of keep track of what it's going to look like. But the spreadsheet did not understand anything about how the Apple II worked, so we would have the human error mistakes going on there in addition to the normal sort of artist drafting process. Let's show copy and paste, another really definitely time-saving sort of thing. Whoops. Sorry, I usually have an external mouse, and that is tripping me up here. But we can do it this way, which is exactly why I built this in. So there's a couple ways to copy and paste because it works a little differently on a Mac than on a PC, and a little differently on a Mac if you have an external mouse versus you don't. So when all else fails, you can click this button here to toggle between selection mode and drawing mode. And we can select these pixels here, go up to edit and select copy, and then go down here and select paste. And Shazam, we've copied our line. There's also keyboard shortcuts for doing copy and paste, Command or Control C and Command Control V like it would usually be. So let's take a look at some actual complete tiles in here. We'll go to load shape, and we can type in the name of a tile, or if we just click this button, we'll get a list of all of the tiles in the database. And I imported all of the original Nox Archaist tiles into the World Builder, so we don't have to recreate them. Many of them will get reused in Nox 2. We'll also create some new ones from Nox 2. But we've got the whole tile set here already loaded in. So let's pull up the wizard tile. It's always a fun one. And we've got a preview window, which I'll talk about a little bit more shortly, but it's showing us the animation. This is an animated tile, and we're getting a preview of what the animation looks like. And over on the left side, we can do editing and make changes to the shape, and also advance through the different animation frames on the left-hand side based on which frame we want to edit. We can pause the animation so we don't have that going on the right side to look more closely at the changes the editing is making. So let's go ahead and remove the wizard's hat just as something to play around with. And now if we restart the animation, we get the flickering effect because we've only removed it from one of the animation frames. If we really wanted to make a headless wizard horseman, we would have to advance the animation frame, remove it from each frame in the pixel editor. Show one more shape here. This is the 4-tile dragon from the original Nox game, and we can fit up to 4 different tiles in the editor at a time, specifically to support this. And everything otherwise basically just looks like what we went through before, just expanding the grid out to being 4 tiles in size. Now, the window on the right we call the preview window, and that is one of the sort of like key pieces of the vision that I had from the beginning of what I was trying to accomplish was to work with Chris, who, as he showed yesterday, has written an Apple II emulator in TypeScript. Well, I'm writing this in TypeScript, and that's no coincidence because I thought, hey, Chris and I can get together, and after I write the pixel editor, we can work together to carve out a section of the Apple II graphics emulation code from his emulator, integrate it into the Nox World Builder TypeScript application so that we can have a preview window that shows real time what the graphics in the pixel editor would look like in game through an emulator. That's it worked out. That is implemented, done, and working. You're seeing it right now. Thank you. Thank you very much. And wanted to just talk a bit about how much of an efficiency gain that represents. The totality of this, what's on the screen right here, including the preview window. So the way the workflow worked when developing the 1,000 unique tiles in Nox Archaist, the original game, is Bill Geege, the artist, would design a tile in the spreadsheet editor that we showed before, and when he was ready and to take a look at it, he would email me the spreadsheet, and I would copy and paste the hex table into the source code, run a build of the game, generating a disk image, email him the disk image, he'd boot the disk image in an emulator, and then look to see, well, one, did he make any mistakes on the Apple II color rules like we talked about before, because the Excel tool didn't enforce those, and then 2, were there any artistic drafting changes that he wanted to make now that he was actually seeing what it was really going to look like. And I would say on average there were about 4 different iterations per tile, and when there was another iteration, he would make the changes in the spreadsheet tool and email it back to me. The whole cycle would start over again. Times about, like I said, about an average of 4 iterations per tile. All of that is gone. Bill can now just use the pixel editor, WYSIWYG it on the preview window, and there's no need for him to ever, or hardly ever, actually get a build of the game to be taking a look at anything, because he can see how it looks right there. And the map editor, which we'll show shortly, will enable him to see the changes on an actual in-game map to see, like, well, is there artifacting between the tile that he drew and the tiles that appear on screen next to it, because those pixels can interact when they're close together like that. So there's a way to do that here in the World Builder as well. And we're, of course, in hindsight, wishing, like, wow, why didn't we do this the first time? But that's all a sunk cost, and there were reasons, like we talked about before. It was the right decision at that time, but now we're circling back. So let's see. Now let's do a little demo of the integration between the World Builder, this pixel editor specifically, and the build process and the game engine. Basically, the way it works is We can make all the changes we want here in the pixel editor. It's saved in the MySQL database, and we can go and select export, and it will export all of the tile shapes in the database and inject that into the build process so that I can run a build, generate a disk image, and see it in an emulator, whether it be Chris's emulator, Virtual2, Micromate, any of the emulators. And to demonstrate that, as threatened in the session description, we're going to change all of the grass tiles in Nox Archaist into cows with one fell swoop, like that. So just to set our baseline here, let's fire up Micromate. Micromate's the awesome Apple II emulator made by Melody and April that is cross-platform, Windows, Mac, and Linux. And for anyone who hasn't seen Nox Archaist before, I'm just going to let this boot up through the splash screen.
Nox Archaist.
This is the sound. Oh, sorry, I should have mentioned it. Yeah. Okay.
Nox Archaist.
There's more to the... We can turn the sound off, though.
That's fine.
Yeah, yeah, good call. There's more to that, the introductory Mockingbird music there, but we just expedited ahead here. So we'll go ahead and jump into the game. Normally, if you're starting a game, you create a new character and the usual stuff, but we're just going to jump right in. And this is the overworld map, and we have lots of grass, no cows, lots of grass. A castle down there, more grass, okay. So we've set our baseline with grass. Now, we're going to load up the grass tile. And then in a separate window, we'll load up the cow tile. And then in a third window, load up not gas, we want grass, there we go. A backup of the grass tile so we don't lose it forever. Then we'll do a copy. We showed copy and paste before with like pixels and lines on the grid, but we can also just click a button to copy an entire tile at once, or it's labeled quadrant because with like the big dragon that was 4 tiles in size, we want to be able to copy any of those 4 quadrants. And when the dragon was on screen, we had copy buttons for quadrant 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we just have quad 0 because this is a single tile. But we'll go ahead and do a copy and paste, and there we go. We've got cows in the grass. Save it. And do our export. Then go over to VS Code and run the build process. The build process is make file, and so we'll do a make clean to get any artifacts out of there from the last build. We'll run a fresh build, and this was actually another significant piece of work that's been done on Nox 2 is basically redoing the build process, changing the cross assembler from SBASM to 64 tasks. That credit actually goes to the Nox Archaist Commodore 64 port team, Marcus Brenner in particular did the heavy lifting on all of that in order to do a more efficient port to the Commodore, basically giving us an alley-oop on the Nox 2 team to take those efficiency gains into the process. And I mean, that took like 15 seconds to run the build, and it was like 2 minutes using SBASM once Nox was at its full size of around 600,000 lines of code and data. It was about 2 minutes because it was running interpreted Python. And that's just obviously not as fast as a compiled language. So we got some nice speed gains there, and the build is done. So this disk image now that was created should have the cows on it, and we'll go ahead and boot it up. Oh, I should have. We'll move it up, yes. Holy cow, look at that. Thank you. Yeah, we'll just move around a little bit to so as to not miss the opportunity to do so. Yeah. yeah, with the it's like a cow XOR build. Okay, so what was the question? Yes, it was not so much asked as commented that this is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles version with a lot of cowabunga, and I think that very much describes it, absolutely. So before we move on to talk about the map editor, let's copy our backup grass tile into the proper grass tile so that we don't end up with lots of cows and all over the place where the grass should be in Nox 2, because that could just get really silly. All right. So now let's take a look at the way that maps were created in Nox 1 before we show the map editor in the world builder. And this was done in Excel, just like the pixel editor. And this is showing a really small excerpt of the world, the overworld map, which has 256 by 256 tiles. So if you look on the left side, you can see we're looking at spreadsheet rows 189 through 211. So it's really a small slice. And anyone who's played Nox Archaist, if you don't recognize the scene, that's Surfeld Castle there, that brown rectangle. Essentially the way it worked is this is just a dump of hex codes, and I was manually changing the colors on the Excel cells to represent, what it was supposed to be. Green for trees, a lighter green for grass, various shades of blue for different depths of water. But again, just like with the pixel editor, Excel didn't understand any of that, and human error was a big issue, as well as remembering hex codes and things like that. So that was, but of course, a whole lot more efficient to have Excel rolling up all that hex into tables and copying and pasting versus laying out a map in graph paper like Richard Garriott would have done. Still a huge efficiency gain here versus the 1980s. We'll now get into the world builder to take another step on that. And, oops. So we want to go over to map view. Actually, we'll open another browser tab and load up a map. We'll load up the overworld. And the map is rendered using the tile data stored in the database, the shape data for the tiles in the database, as well as the map data in the database indicating which tile to use in each position of the map. And then it's rendered in the editor window on the left-hand side, again using Chris Torrance's emulation code that's embedded in here. And so it really just kind of looks like we're in the game, but yet we're in an editor. And we can move around on the map just like we would in the game. Like come down here to Surtheld Castle. And the size of this map editor window is the same number of tiles as in game, 17 wide by 11 deep. So it's really designed to show, like, this is what the map is going to look in game as it's being built. So we can fly the airplane and build it at the same time, I guess. And we can also buzz around the map really fast by holding down the Shift key. Just if we want to get to a different place, we're doing editing quickly. And another feature that can also be used to jump around quickly is to toggle between screen view, what we're looking at now, and full map view. So let's click the full map view button, and we get a bird's eye view of the entire Nox overworld map. If you have the Nox Archaist box set, your cloth map should look very similar to this, except this business up here in the upper left, that's the test island, which only appears in test builds like this. This rectangle, red rectangle kind of towards the bottom, that's showing the active screen view that we were looking at before. And the mouse cursor also has like a thin red rectangle attached, allowing us to click on another place in the map to zoom the screen view in to wherever we click. Like let's click over here by Northeld Castle, and Shazam, our screen view is now centered there. So when making a big map like this, I guess the word big is relative here, but 256 by 256 is big enough that when I'm doing the editing for it, I might start out editing in the lower left-hand corner, and then at some point I'm up in the upper right-hand corner, and on a given day, if I'm jumping in to do a work session, this will enable me to just very quickly go to full map view and click wherever the area of the map is that I'm working on to pretty instantaneously zoom in there and resume work. So let's actually play with cows one more time. So we'll copy the copy the cow to the grass, go back over to the map editor, and this button here will refresh all of the data from the database. Thank you. And just to illustrate how integrated everything is, which will be a big time saver. And again, I'm going to copy this back quick. And let's talk about the palette window messy business there on the right. So the vision behind that is being able to drag a tile from the palette window on the right to the map editor on the left to actually edit the map or build the map, or do a selection of tiles in the palette window. Let's see. Again, I'm getting messed up by not having an external mouse here, but with an external mouse, at least I'm able to select a group of tiles in the palette window, and then eventually would be able to then copy and paste them into the map editor. But the reason it looks like such a mess is this is just a dump of the tile set. The active tile set. There are 7 different tile sets of the game. That's how we broke up the 1,000 unique tiles. Well, I had broken up into 7 different tile sets for overworld, keep, town, castle, ruins, underworld. I might have missed 1 or 2 in there. And the tile set that's being shown here is actually not even the overworld tile set. It's the keep tile set because this is highly highly work in process here in the palette window. I got it to this point and then started working on map objects, which we'll talk about in a bit as well. But basically, where this is going with the palette window is each tile set, town, castle, keep, etc., is going to have at least one, possibly a couple of different palette maps. And the palette map is 24 by 24 tiles, which is like 576, I want to say, double the number of tiles actually in the tile set. So I think that's enough space that I can take the tiles in the tile set and actually draw a mini map, which would show how the tiles actually fit together and are intended to be used. Like, for example, the castle here, this is 8 different tiles. And the hex codes for those tiles are scattered all over the place. They're not sequential for various reasons on how the game engine works. It was a total nightmare in the Excel tools to deal with the multi-tile layouts like that, because I wouldn't remember those hex codes and have to track all that down and everything else. And it would actually be kind of tedious to be selecting each castle tile from a palette window like we're seeing here, especially if it's just dumping it in tile ID order, because they'd be scattered all over the place. But by making a mini map to be the palette for each tile set, I can actually assemble that castle in the palette map for the overworld tile set. And then as I'm making the overworld map, I want to place a castle somewhere. It's just literally then select the castle from the palette window, do a copy, and then paste it in onto the overworld map. And there's like easily 1 or 2 dozen multi-tile layouts in the game, not even counting the 4-tile mobs. So this really did get to be a significant issue and time sink, just dealing with all of those jigsaw puzzles. And my vision for the palette window will just streamline all of that. I wanted to show here, again, on the theme of the multi-tile layouts and the jigsaw puzzle, the tediousness of the Nox 1 method of doing it. I had a literal 3-ring binder with printouts of how the jigsaw puzzles would fit together, or at least the ones more commonly used, and it's probably too far away to see, so I won't comment on each one. But this is things like railroad tracks and lava flows, river tiles. I guess I am commenting on each one. Shoreline, dungeon tunnels, various different things. And for Nox 2, I can throw that out the window. Of course, I won't really, because I'm a pack rat and keep all this stuff. But will not need the 3-ring binder for Nox 2. So let's take a look at map objects, which is the rabbit hole I chose to dive down instead of finishing the palette window for various reasons. So in the original game, for the original Nox Archaist game, creating a map object was done in an Excel spreadsheet, and it's probably even more rudimentary than the pixel editor. It's basically just a spreadsheet that I type hex numbers in, and I happen to type them in groupings of 4 because a map object in the game engine is 4 bytes. The game engine has a parser that looks through a specific area of memory, and it looks through it in 4 byte increments, and that's how things like doors and treasure chests and other things with special functionality would get into the game. And so again, it became a game of what are the hex codes I need for to make this, and tracking them down and everything else. So let's show actually creating a couple of map objects. I'll go into a town map for this. Map objects exist in a layer, and terrain tiles exist in a layer. Think of it as like you've got the terrain layer at the bottom, and then the map object layer on top of that, and that is to reflect the way the game engine prioritizes. If it sees that there's a floor tile in the terrain layer and a door tile in the object layer, as long as the closed bit is set on the door, it'll draw the door tile and not the floor tile. So it's kind of stacked in that fashion. So let's actually add a door. And so I select the door from the palette on the right window, and then click on the map where I want the door to appear. Click the plus sign. And here's where we select different types of objects. All these exist in the same map object layer, because really none of them can exist on top of each other. You wouldn't have a mob standing on an NPC, for example. And then selecting object type. There are 2 dozen, 3 dozen-ish different types of objects that the game engine is configured to support. I only put 4 in so far because I was fleshing out all of the data structures, sort of make sure that everything is going to work and be scalable before going in and adding all the different object types. So let's do a gold-only chest. This pops up 2 input fields, and basically what these do is they control how much gold the chest is going to drop and how difficult the lock is to pick. And ultimately, these are basically fields that the game engine understands and knows what to do with, and the names here are just kind of what I remember the functionality by. We just fill in those fields, click create, and bam, there's a door on the map. Now, if we want to create, we can create a treasure chest, or we did. What did I just do?
You created a treasure door.
I created a treasure door. Yes. So, what that kind of illustrates is there aren't a whole lot of rules. Well, actually, there's no rules between the map object functionality in the game engine and the tile that you give to it. And just imagine the kind of sneaky game design stuff that I can do with that. So it was both by necessity of limitations of, we're not going to spend memory in the Apple II saying, no, you can't have a door on this kind of object, but also leaving it open like that was a game design tool. Anyway, so yes, we created a treasure door. Well, why not? A little panel in the secret panel in the door, you pull the treasure out. We might do that next too. You never know. Well, let's create a different kind of treasure object, one for a specific item. And when we select a specific item for the treasure object, we get this list of state flags. And we need to select a state flag because if the chest is going to just drop a specific item as opposed to, it's going to give you some gold and maybe 5 to 8 random loot items, which some chests do. That's a different type of object. But if it's going to drop a specific item, it's going to be something cool and important that we only want the player to be able to get once. We don't want him to be able to just farm a chest and get 3 dozen crossbows of plus wham. I know Kate would be doing Cat would be doing that immediately had we not protected that chest with a state flag. And the state flags are just 1 bit. It's a bit flag, and if it's set, that means that the player's looted the chest. If it's not set, then the item is given to the player. And in the database, all these state flags are tracked so that one state flag is not used more than once. And all that will get exported into the source code to manage everything. And after we select the state flag, then we select actually the item that we want the chest to produce. We've got weapons, armor, miscellaneous. Right now I just have a couple of test items in there, but we can select wherever we want. Then the interface tells us there's nothing left to configure. We click Create Object, and the chest appears. There is there's more to come in this tool. For example, with those other views, we'll be able to use it to add NPC dialog, create the schedules used by NPCs, and various other things. In the 5 years that it took to create Nox 1, 2 of those years were just creating the content. So I think it's a really worthwhile investment to make the Nox World Builder very robust for not just Nox 2, but also hopefully other games, paying dividends, if you will, into the future. One of my key goals was integration between the various UI views and the data, some of which we've showed here today, and that will include in the game data view being able to add all the different items in the game. There were over 500 unique items in Nox 1. We'll be able to add all those in through this UI, and then when placing those items in the game, just like shown, adding a treasure object, it will give us a list of the items that are available rather than tracking down hex codes for all that stuff. Will be a big time saver. The other key goal of the World Builder project was and is to make it usable by multiple team members without having to pass data files around, making it a nightmare to keep everything in sync. That's why I decided to make it a web app using a hosted database. And with these key features, I think that the Nox World Builder is or will be on par with the content creation tools used to make modern games, except perhaps the use of AI, which is starting to get into that world at this point. So let's wrap up here. Do you want to hear about the Nox Archaist II release date? There isn't one. Because I learned a lot of lessons from developing Nox 1, and one thing I learned is that every date that I ever gave was wrong. I can say that there are multiple years ahead of us, but beyond that, I would just be guessing, and it wouldn't be probably a particularly accurate guess at that. However, be assured that we are committed to seeing this project through, just like the original game, just like the Lord of Storms expansion and the making of Nox book and the Book of Hints. Our motto at 6502 Workshop is, we get things done. So, thank you. Thank you, thank you. If you haven't checked out the Nox Archaist expansion, Lord of Storms, I encourage you to do so. It has a new quest line with various new items, mobs, and puzzle mechanics not seen in the original game. There's also some new features like the ability to rename characters in your party, both the main characters and joinable ones you pick up along the way. For example, you could give them all Lord of the Rings names or Dragonlance names or really whatever you want. And the expansion is available both on our web store at 6502workshop.com and also on Steam and Good Old Games. And I also want to say thank you very much to everyone who supported the Kickstarter back in 2019 for the original game. And thank you very much to everyone who is currently supporting our Patreon. This has been very helpful, as I'm at a different place in life than I was when developing the original Nox game with a lot less free time. But since I'm a freelance consultant with a flexible schedule, Patreon support basically translates into less hours I need to spend consulting and more hours I can spend on Nox 2 development. So If you haven't already and you'd like to join our Patreon, just head over to patreon.6502workshop.com. And then I also wanted to say thank you very much to my 6502 Workshop teammates for everything that you've done and continue to do. I very much appreciate it, and thank you everyone for watching today, and I appreciate all of your complimentary applause and look forward to putting Nox Archaist II in your hands in the future. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Joe?
Hey, do you plan on releasing the map maker and tile maker tools to the public to help develop their own applications?
The question is, do I plan on releasing the Nox World Builder to the public to help people to make their own Apple II games? The answer is, I'm very open to doing that. I think that's a definite possibility. The first mission is just get it created for Nox 2, and then we'll have to take a look at what would it take to make that a usable tool more broadly in scope. But definitely that's something that down the road we'll be taking a look at. Kat.
So when will you be releasing the Oops All Cows edition of Nox Archaist?
The question is, when will we be releasing the Oops All Cows edition of Nox Archaist? I don't know, but I'm definitely getting the impression there could be some interest for that. So I will think on that. That's my answer. That you have a point. It doesn't exactly take all that long to run a build. Challenge. I won't say challenge accepted, but challenge being considered. Other questions? Yes?
Yes, so the original Apple II, we had our Penguin pixels and against the artifact, and they, as you're pointing out, pixels look like lines, and the pixels now don't have HD cards and flat panel screens. So how much of a challenge has that been for you? To still get the look and feel that you want in your game, trying to support so many different video options.
So the question is, in the modern world of Apple II computing, with all the different video adapters and devices, how much of a challenge has it been to get the pixels to look the way that we want, taking into consideration artifacting and other things that are just part of Apple II graphics? And I would say I could probably talk a long time about this, but my summary answer would be it definitely has been a challenge. We definitely did some optimizing of like, okay, well this looks good on this and this, but oops, not on that, so let's make it a change here and there. There was definitely a non-trivial amount of that went on in the original Nox project. Additionally, we also we did leverage some of the artifacting. We've got, I don't remember if they were shown in any of the graphics on screen, but we've got dark blues, we've got yellows, where we're leveraging the NTSC artifacts to create colors beyond what was originally like documented, supported, and that, to some extent, with like that, for example, we ended up kind of having to say, okay, we're primarily making this for original hardware. And we're not going to let incompatibility with maybe something that came later stand in the way of doing something really cool for the original hardware. And that was essentially just a kind of a design and development choice at some point. And the artifacting colors in particular, I mean, not all emulators support the artifacting. I've lobbied the emulator developers to please support it. Some added it at my request, and others probably will someday. But yeah, that's kind of the contours of the challenge around that. Does that answer the question, or do you want to follow up? Okay.
Or do you want to mention like color printing and how that, for the line emulator, not only with like Apple color printing, how you can turn it off.
Yes. Yeah. So interestingly, Nox Archaist has been warmly embraced by the Apple II community, to which I am eternally grateful to all of you, and it has also been embraced much farther than the Apple II community, kind of into what I would call like the broad retro RPG universe, which is really vast, actually, as it turns out. Didn't realize that at the time. One of the most common critiques I get on the game from people who never used an Apple II, or even if they did, it was forever ago, they don't really kind of think of themselves as an Apple II user, is they look at the screen and they say, your graphics make my eyes hurt because of the bleeding, the color bleeding, or I can't read the text. That comes up a lot, especially on Steam, because Steam is where a lot of those folks are becoming aware of the game, and ultimately, I refuse to change any of it, because this is an Apple II game. We didn't make it that way by accident. That was by design. That is not a bug, that's a feature. And I've explained that many times to many different posts over time. And however, there's a however on this, which is what Chris was getting at a moment ago, is there are some Apple II emulators, like Chris's emulator, and Apple one has some capability along this line as well, and others also might, these are just what I'm familiar with, have the ability to essentially turn off color fringing, or at least turn it off for text. And these modes, we're now responding to folks that are concerned about this, that you know, you have an option if you'd like to make the graphics not have color fringing and the text not have color fringing. Here's an emulator that you can run it in, and here's the options you can click on, and now you can get it to look more like what you would like it to be. And I feel okay about that, because it's not compromising anything in terms of how it's going to look on the real original hardware or on emulators running in standard mode. It's just an option that some emulators have chosen to add. Other questions, if any? Going once, going twice. Yes?
So, though it's kind of not directly involved with you, but has there been any movement on Nox 1 on other platforms or the GS or anything?
Sure. So, good news and bad news. Oh, yes, thank you for the reminder to repeat the question. It was, has there been any movement on other versions or ports of Nox to other platforms, such as the 2GS, the original Nox game that is? And it's kind of a good news, bad news answer. And I would say the bad news is I really have not seen any movement on the 2GS port. As many of you may know, Berger Becky did take that on a number of years ago, and you know, she just doesn't have a whole lot of time. I think she'll, you know, do it someday, but it's not something to set a watch to, I don't think. And you know, if it gets to a point where I feel like you know, it's getting close, I'll certainly mention something. The good news part of it, though, this may not be as much good news for us here at KansasFest, is there is a lot of activity going on in the Commodore 64 port. My basic position on ports of the original Nox game is I'm all for it. You know, give me a lead programmer to take on the project, and I'm happy to work with them to answer specific questions about the code. I'm all for it, but I'm never going to do that. My passion is where it is. And what the Commodore community did is they said, challenge accepted. One of the people who asked this and got that answer from me said, challenge accepted. Literally started posting around a different Commodore message board saying, hey, I talked to the Nox Archaist developer, and he's all on board for 64, but we just got to find a programmer and an artist and this and that. They literally recruited a team. And I'm like, well, okay. And it turned out to be, there was a little bit of storming, norming, and performing that went on there with getting things rolling there. But there's a team that is steadily making progress on it, and I've been really cautious about even mentioning that this port has been happening because I hate to get expectations up. But it is, I do see enough activity going on with that group that I'm pretty confident it's going to happen. I don't know if it's another year out or 2 years or any of that, but I think that's going to happen. There really isn't anything other than that. There's been occasionally a few whispers about Amiga or this or that, but nothing that's reached the point of somebody stepping forward saying, hey, I can lead this project. So that's the answer to that question. Are there any other questions today? Yes?
After doing something this complex on the Apple II, what's your favorite thing about the Apple II and what you hate most?
So the question is, after doing something this complex on the Apple II, what's my favorite thing about the Apple II and what do I hate most about it? I would say that my favorite thing about doing development work like this on the Apple II is that assembly language is very simple in syntax, despite being very complex in environment, whereas in contrast, a modern language like TypeScript is absolutely horribly complicated and gobbledygooky in syntax and has a relatively simple environment because of all the advantages of modern computing. So I really love that assembly language, really only has probably a dozen opcodes that I use 90% of the time, and there's only not that many more in total, and I really, really like that. That's my sweet spot in terms of the kind of programming that I like to do. I would say what I hate the most is, again, programming in 6502 assembly language. That complexity of environment leads to the ability to really screw things up in terms of you can do anything you want in assembly. There's no guardrails, and that can be really helpful in things, but because there's no guardrails and you can accidentally overwrite areas of memory that you shouldn't and stuff like that, it is really easy to create very nasty intermittent bugs that might happen one every 3 tries. It might be a bug that happens once and never again, or it may take a week to reproduce it. I mean, it's just all over the map. And during the development, I just lived in fear of intermittent bugs, and I ran a really, really, really tight code, test, fix bug kind of process to try to minimize that risk. But nonetheless, they still crept in there, and we really didn't have that great of tools for tracking them down the first time around, especially if they were on real hardware. I mean, I literally had a bug that only occurred on the Apple IIgs, real hardware, nothing else, no emulators, no nothing. And the way I tracked it down is I wrote into the code to print a hex number at various different stages of the subroutine, so I could see on screen which is the last one that printed before the screen went to garbage. And I took my iPad and I pointed it at the GS monitor. It did a recording because it was all flying by so fast I wouldn't see the debug code prints before it crashed, but then I played back on the iPad. This is what we were doing in Nox 1. So it's fun looking back on it, but I did not like that at all. Those were some really, really terrifying. I mean, there were moments I was like, are we even going to be able to release this game because of serious problems like that? Fortunately, for Nox 2, this time around, we're going to have much better debugging tools because of things like Chris Torrence is doing in his emulator that just the other day that he was showing here. He's been taking my feedback on that, the different kind of debugging tools that would be really helpful, especially time travel. That's going to be my intermittent bug squasher. Okay, intermittent bug happened. Well, let's just rewind the state, step through the code, set our breakpoints, no problem. So we'll have that, and then John Flanagan and his partner Rickles, they're working on a hardware-based project, the Apple Teeny, which John's presenting tomorrow, which is really about adding a bunch of enhanced capabilities to the Apple II, but they're like going down to the bus level, monitoring what's going on. And at one point I said to him, like, well, hey, is there a way that you could basically add on a debugger, to what you're doing there, so that even if there's a bug on real hardware, I've got a way to be able to track down an intermittent bug without getting into some of the crazy stuff like in Nox 1. So yeah, that's favorite, least favorite. Any other questions? Yes?
So this is moving to this whole process reversal, right? It's not only my second AS, but are you writing all the game logic itself basically unique for each game that's survival, or is it like kind of interpreting a game engine that then you can use to speed up development?
No, just to clarify, are you asking about like the game itself or the world builder creation?
So you have the world builder, right, which creates your maps and your
Yeah.
file, but like when somebody's walking through that world, is that all handcrafted, similar to do that? And you have it's, oh, if I encounter this thing, then I want to do that kind of action, or is that like also in the world builder?
So the question is, in the actual Nox Archaist game, if everything is like raw assembly code for managing the player walking around the map and encountering objects, or if some of that logic is embedded in the world builder and injected into the game engine. And the answer to that is, I would say mostly, I would say entirely, the actual operation code, the executable code for the Nox Archaist game is pure custom assembly. There is data that feeds into that, like map objects, like we were taking a look at there, where the game engine has a map object parser, where it's going to parse a page of memory in 4-byte chunks to identify objects, and based on the hex values it sees there, it'll know, okay, there's a treasure chest here, here's the coordinates on the map, and things like that. So really what the world builder is doing is it's creating game data, and that data then is interpreted by the actual operational code of the engine itself. I don't anticipate that the world builder is actually going to write any true executable assembly code to then inject into the engine. I wouldn't rule it out if I saw a compelling use case for it, but right now my vision is more just around it's creating data. But the Nox engine, I built it in a very modular, scalable way where there's an awful lot of stuff that gets done, that's data driven to begin with. So I think we can go a long way just working on the data side. So I know we're running late here and it's time for lunch, so I'm happy to answer any other questions at lunch or later. Just hit me up, and thanks again for checking out my session today, and see you around.
Quinn asked, said that the graphics editor that enforces and previews high-res graphics rules is amazing. Any chance of factoring that out into a tool that can save the binary data?
Quinn, could you clarify that question a bit? The way I'm thinking about it is the export, which I know you mentioned that you saw with the cow trick, where it exported from the world builder into the build process. That is a binary export. So I'm guessing you're asking about something else. If you can clarify.
I see. So you could build the thing and export it, and then not finish building the game. You could just use the asset.
Right. Yeah, that's very doable. It would take a little bit of rejiggering of things to kind of isolate that functionality, so that it could be like its own standalone thing. But yeah, I mean that's very doable. And my number one goal, of course, is to actually finish the world builder and then finish Nox Archaist II, and so that's going to be years. But yeah, on the other side of that, there's a lot of projects I would like to do. And one of them certainly would be to try to turn the world builder into something that is community accessible for doing things, because there's certainly a lot of capability that we're bringing to the table there. So yeah, that's definitely in the thought process. Let's see, other questions. Will the cow themed Nox merch be available? And thank you for the compliment, Ron. I don't think we've really thought through whether there's going to be any Go-themed Nox merch, but consider the idea planted. That's an interesting thought for sure. And Michael has a question. How did you decide on using JavaScript, TypeScript for your tool chain? And the answer is, it was a long and arduous process, and I talked to over half a dozen different people between KansasFest last year and shortly thereafter, and really was kind of oscillating between a number of different options, a lot of different pros and cons. I was looking at C#, for example, for a while. I knew I wanted to do it on the Mac, but I started looking into C# development on the Mac and just kind of started to lose enthusiasm for it when I realized that, yeah, but if I do that, I'm basically, you know, if I want to support Windows, which I do, I'm basically gonna have to build a UI, you know, in two different, you know, desktop, you know, platforms, and that wasn't really appealing. And definitely I had, and this kind of leads into your second question, Michael, about Chris's Apple II TS emulator. I totally had on my radar in that analysis the fact that Chris had made this emulator in TypeScript, and that if I wrote the world builder in TypeScript, the feasibility of integrating some of his emulation code into the world builder to create the preview would be very doable. If I had done it in something else, I mean, obviously there would have had to been some kind of language conversion going on there, and I have a feeling it just wouldn't have happened. So that was definitely a big factor in that decision to use JavaScript, TypeScript, was just incorporating that integration in. And I would say that pushed it over the top among some of these other considerations. How difficult was it to integrate Chris's Apple II TS code? I think Chris would agree that it was really fairly straightforward. On my end of it, I pretty much brought things to a point where I served up a couple of data structures that represented what was going on in the pixel editor, or in the case of the map editor where we're using the Apple II TS code to do the rendering. I took care of grabbing, doing the calls to the back end, to the MySQL database, getting all of the hex data organized, and serving up a data structure to basically for Chris to come in, take that handoff, and you know, he carved out whatever portion of the Apple II TS code was needed to just do that graphics piece, took the data structure handoff and adapted the graphics emulation code to, you know, the kind of the screen real estate we were working with, and voila. I mean, it was literally, I think, a case of like, I said, hey, I'm ready, got a data structure for you, and I think he knocked it out in an evening or something. Chris can comment here if he thinks I have rose-colored glasses as far as how it went on his end, but it certainly looked to me like it was pretty straightforward. So yeah, I felt, you know, very good about the choice after seeing how quickly and easily that came together, and seeing the results on screen, feeling like I'm in the game while I'm making the game. You know, who said you can't build the airplane and fly it at the same time? Anyway, so let's see, other questions. Jeff, thank you for the compliment on the background. Nox Archaist II Dragonsmere background here. This will be the box cover art, and this is kind of a shrunk version of it for purposes here of the my Zoom background. It's much taller than this, and that'll be the box covered art. Quinn says, what does the layer, or asks, what does the layer between your UI and MySQL look like? Are you running your queries through REST? Is the database local or hosted elsewhere? AWS. So basically, I'm running TypeScript and React on the front end, which I fire up in its own terminal window on my Mac, and then I'm running Node.js and MySQL on the back end, which is a separate terminal window. So it's kind of like two different. Well, it's a client being fired up and a server being fired up, essentially. So what happens is the front end makes a request to a URL to get data, essentially. That's all I'm using the back end for, is really to serve up data from MySQL. So the front end will make a request for data from the database. It'll make it to a URL, and that URL is attached to the back end. The back end is configured so that it knows where authorized requests are coming from and things like that. If it gets a authorized request, it then reaches out to the MySQL application and executes a query, gets a response back, returns that the data to the front end. So the way I have it set up is both local and hosted. Ultimately, the vision here is for it to be hosted because for team collaboration. So I've got all that set up and working. And then I also have it set up locally because it's just faster to do development that way for various reasons. And I've worked out the process so that I can periodically sync the database between local and remote to update the database that the hosted version is using, or vice versa, if for some reason that was needed. No, it's not running on AWS, and I actually don't want to say the name of the host because I haven't exactly implemented a whole lot of security on it yet at this point. Yeah, that's how that works. And then in closing, I just wanted to say, as it looks like we're kind of coming to the end of the time, if you haven't checked out the Nox Archaist expansion, Lord of Storms, I encourage you to do so. It has a new quest line with various items, mobs, puzzle mechanics not seen in the original game. There's also some new features like the ability to rename your characters in your party, both main and joinable. You could give them Lord of the Rings names, Dragonlance names, whatever you want. It's available on our website, 6502workshop.com, as well as Steam and GOG. And I also wanted to thank everyone who supported the Kickstarter back in 2019 for the original Nox Archaist game. And thank you for everyone who's currently supporting our Patreon. This has been very helpful as I'm at a different place in life than I was during development of Nox 1 with less free time. But since I'm a freelance consultant with flexible schedule, Patreon support basically translates into less hours I need to spend consulting and more hours I can spend on Nox 2 development. If you'd like to join our Patreon, just head over to 6502workshop, or I'm sorry, head over to patreon.6502workshop.com. And lastly, just wanted to say thanks to all of my 6502 Workshop teammates for everything that you've done and continue to do.